ESPN dropped a really interesting piece that I wonder, is this going to give the Cowboys the division? Because when we look at the NFC East this year, who is contending for the division championship here, Blake? How many teams do you think have a real chance at this?
For the entire conference, or just as
NFC East?
I would say the Eagles, if I had to guess, when you're looking at Vegas, have the best odds to win it. Cowboys would be second. Commanders third, Giants fourth. Two teams really have a chance.
Do you believe in the Commanders at all to do this?
No.
Okay, so you feel like there's just two of these. And I'd agree with your assessment there all the way around. However, the Eagles, there's an interesting piece put out today from ESPN about the Eagles and some of the tumult that they went through last season. And the timing of this releasing is also very interesting, right? Because if you'll remember, when we got to kind of coaching carousel time, Nick Sirianni was one of those dudes that we were like, hey, is he going to get fired? And ultimately he did not. But if this piece comes out at that point, you go, okay, this is part of them figuring out if he's going to get fired. However, on August 7th in training camp, when teams are getting together, we get a piece that talks about what seems to be a divide that happened last year between Jalen Hurts, the newly paid starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles, and Nick Sirianni, their head coach. And so in reading through this piece, there's a lot of things that were interesting. Obviously, they had new coordinators, both offensive and defensive, because both of their coordinators had been stolen by different teams. Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator, went to be the head coach of the Cardinals. And then, oh my goodness, what's my guy that went to the Indianapolis Colts to be the head coach there? The offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen. Yeah, we both realized it at the same exact time. And so they had new coordinators, namely the offensive coordinator being Brian Johnson, who I didn't realize had connections with Jalen Hurts. Apparently,
like to high school.
Yeah, Brian Johnson played high school in
Texas,
in I think Bayview.
Yeah,
at Robert E. Lee. Which kind of crazy that we still have high schools named Robert E. Lee, but neither here nor there. But yeah, under a very on Hurts, Jalen Hurts' pops, right? The dude who obviously was the coach, because we've heard plenty that Jalen Hurts is a coach's kid. And those guys, it seems like offensively, those guys did not have a working rapport that was good with Nick Sirianni, who was ostensibly an offensive coach. Brian Johnson was the play caller, but Nick Sirianni did not necessarily gel with some of the feelings on the ways that they were playing. And Nick Sirianni maybe wanted to keep their offense last year more akin to what they had done previous years. And Brian Johnson wanted his opportunity, now becoming an offensive coordinator after being a quarterback coach, and to impact the offense. And it seems like all of those things helped to make a Eagles team that, although they started 10-1, they never really were very, very convincing. I think we all looked at that Eagles team and they're like, that's kind of fraudulent. And ultimately the end of the season showed that. But I bring all of this up, and if you really read into the piece, which I believe you did as well, I don't think that these issues are necessarily going away, because a lot of this stemmed from Jalen Hurts himself and maybe not necessarily believing in the head coach. And Nick Sirianni, who remains the head coach with two different new coordinators, Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator now, who apparently has been given a little bit more leeway. But this all feels like there's a lot of negativity in that team between the two main factors in any given team: your head coach and your starting quarterback, especially one that has been paid well to be like the franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I think these stories, when they come out, are always interesting, because I feel like as fans, as media, we don't know how much the head coach is really involved with the play calling until something like this comes out, a report comes out, or a player says something, because there's offensive coordinators all around the league, and you would assume they call the play, the team runs the play that the offensive coordinator calls. But I think more and more we're seeing now these head coaches are getting involved when it's third down. Okay, you're going on my play call. I don't really care what you called. You called pass, and they even referenced it in the story against the Giants that it was a pass call on a critical third down, and they ended up running the ball because Sirianni wanted to run the ball. They didn't pick up the first down, frustrations. And at that point, there was kind of a blurred line of who's calling the plays, who do we defer to. And if you're Jalen Hurts, if you're an offensive player like A.J. Brown, if you're maybe a Lane Johnson, one of the big-time linemen, and you're trying to figure out, okay, are we a run-first team? Are we an RPO team? Are we an intermediate team? Are we kind of a bounce all over, and you don't have a sense of direction? You don't know who to ask. That's not going to be a good work environment. As you saw as the Eagles, they have the talent, maybe outside of linebacker and corner last year, but they were a talented team, It was just you felt the camaraderie was not there. You felt like there was not a cohesive team.
And it's not just felt. We're getting kind of reporting that there wasn't camaraderie necessarily.
I think last year we felt that way, but there wasn't a big report about it. And then now we're getting that confirmation of like, yep, there was internal things going on. These kind of trepidations and roadblocks were in this relationship between, like you said, the quarterback and the head coach, which is so important. And in this kind of article by ESPN, it details that, like you said, Kellen Moore is getting a little more leadway, a little more cachet, and Sirianni's kind of pulled off. I wonder how it's easy to do that in the offseason. How long when adversity hits, when something goes wrong, does Sirianni still defer and go, I like the new system we've built with Kellen Moore and Jalen Hurts and kind of implementing more short, quick game things, running the quarterback, or does he defer back to what he truly believes in and we need to do this and do that?
I also wonder, we're in a place where you guys, because he's a CEO quarterback or head coach now, right? And he doesn't have any effect on the offense. They just brought in, they fired both of the folks that he hired to replace the vacancies that they had. And really, I felt like Howie Roseman basically put in the coordinators that he wanted and was like, Nick, you just sit there and you be the head coach. However, it sounds like he does not have like that CEO idea of like having his hands in everything and being able to run everything. I do wonder if this is ripe for the opportunity, or ripe rather, for the opportunity of like that discord coming back. Like you mentioned, when cracks start to show up, when adversity hits, are they going to be able to, maintain that? And is that going to lead to a team that is more capable of collapsing? Because we looked at that team and they collapsed at the back end of that. And that collapse wasn't just because they were not playing well. Those dudes looked like they were quitting.
Yep.
And if they're quitting on the coach. That coach is still the coach.
Still there.
And so I think that might leave this whole thing more vulnerable, even though Howie Roseman every offseason gets crowned as the executive of the year because he's putting together a really talented team. Although that pass rush is not as talented as it has been in the past, if I'm going to find one little thing to try and needle at. But it looks like the day-to-day coaching structure of this might not be working together, especially in a way where Jalen Hurts, who has been wildly coachable all through his career, he's played in all sorts of different systems. He seemed to be able to like go along with what's happening. Jalen Hurts, according to this reporting by ESPN, seems to have some level of issues with the coach who remains there and is not necessarily involved in any of these things. And if your job is now on the line, are you going to get involved? Are you going to dictate some things? Is this going to blow up? I think that this could leave room for that dysfunction to eat away at what is a really talented team and maybe the only other talented team in the division for you.
Yeah, when you look at, I just looked up the win total and the projected and strength of schedule. When it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles, they have the 9th hardest schedule in the entire NFL. Their betting line right now is at 10.5. I think if you're a Cowboys fan, even though you didn't have the best offseason, as their win total is also at 10.5, but have the 22nd hardest schedule, I don't think it's much of, are the Cowboys going to be this much better and dominate the division? I just think right now the division's in a little bit of a decline, in my personal opinion, right now. So I think it is something where you could take grasp of it, even if you don't have the best team on paper, that you're not foaming at the mouth of with what the Cowboys roster currently is constructed. As we saw last year in the story, it details Jalen Hurts not being too good at going against the blitz. It goes, most notably, he threw the most interceptions in the league against the blitz, having 8 of them, and went from 9th to 30th in touchdown rate at a 2.7%. So I don't know if that changes with Kellen Moore, because it's not like Kellen Moore and Justin Herbert lit the world on fire last year, even though he only had him for a little bit part of the season.
Yeah.
I just wonder if Kellen Moore your saving grace? Is that enough in this division? It might be. With how the division's looking right now, but I also wouldn't bet on it and be like, oh, the Eagles are going to run away with this just because they have a little bit more of a talented roster.
Yeah, and then I think also with Kellen Moore got really good numbers out of, obviously, this Cowboys offense when he was the head of it. Yeah. But one of the criticisms I know we kind of threw up there for him was that sometimes it did not feel like the situational play calling was incredible. And that's one thing that they're trying to replace in a big way. The last time when they were really good was with Shane Steichen as the offensive coordinator. And one of the things he did, particularly I thought was incredible last year that he did with the Colts, was he seemed like at any given point, even with Gardner Minshew as the quarterback, the right play was being called to put them in a position of success. And I think that was one of the things that really helped the Eagles when he was the play caller. Yeah. I do wonder is that something that Kellen Moore's gotten better at in his time away from the Cowboys, is knowing situationally how to have the right play call and how to have plays that build upon each other to set them up for success, because that could also put them in a place where they're in another situation where the offense isn't balanced enough, where they don't have the intermediate routes and those types of things, as the story detailed that they were, Jalen Hurts was clamoring for, and that they might still be susceptible to some of the things that you mentioned last year.
I think when you have an out-of-the-box quarterback, an unorthodox quarterback like a Jalen Hurts that's able to run the ball really well, it's one of your running options, you're using them on the goal line, you're using RPOs, you kind of have to have a little bit of an unorthodox coach. You got to have somebody that can call some creative play calls, that can get Hurts into space, can get him in some running lanes, can get A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith into some quick game. I think when you have a very structured, maybe traditional coach that's just like, let's just throw it down the field, you hand the ball up to the running back on first down, move along. I just think, in today's NFL, with all the motion that goes on and it mentions in the story, Eagles used motion the least in the NFL. Jalen Hurts was not happy with it. I think you have to have some creativity, especially when you have a quarterback like Hurts, and use him to the best of his ability, which I think was not being done last year for whatever reason. Johnson, Steichen, Sirianni, Hurts, whoever you want to put the blame on, it wasn't happening.
Real quick before we move along, I did say that I think that this could maybe give the division to the Cowboys, but I do find this interesting. We don't often get a lot, as you mentioned, we don't often get a lot of insight into coaching relationships with, franchise quarterbacks, with, that type of situation, coordinators. Does this at all, was there anything in this or any time while reading this where you go, did they give you any questions as to how McCarthy operates with the quarterback? Because, again, all the things that we get seems to be positive. Everything seems to work out. But we did have an instance where first 5 weeks of last year, the offense did not quite go, and you had to have somebody in the offense, CeeDee Lamb, going, hey, can we shift this in a way so I can get involved in a way? Is there any questions that popped up for you with the Cowboys and the coaching and that type of stuff from seeing that the Eagles had big issues in that way?
I think the Cowboys, I trust a little bit more with that coach star player connection. But that's not saying a whole lot, because the Eagles have set the bar a little low, especially with how last season went. But I mean, you saw it at certain points during the season, like you mentioned, those first 5 weeks, that playoff game, being in the locker room there, it did not seem like, oh, we all understood this is going to be a tough game and you lose some. It was like, without saying it, it was like, this is that guy's fault. This is you felt it in the room of just I can't believe we just did that. There's no way this happened to this. And I feel like there might be a little bit of disconnect, minor when it comes to McCarthy and those guys, but it's nothing major where you're going to see their play get on it. But I would say there's probably a little bit, but in this story, it just opens your eyes to it a little bit more, that it could be happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. So, but one of the things that is nice with the Cowboys, McCarthy, now the offensive play caller, there's direct contact with, and they have to work together, Dak Prescott and McCarthy. I'm not saying that this is happening, the Sirianni and Jalen Hurts split that's been written about in ESPN, that those things are still the case, but with the Cowboys. But I think that's it was an eye-opener, and maybe that level of dysfunction could remain with the Eagles, especially as those parties still are there, and maybe that gives the division to your Dallas Cowboys.